It's the Real Estate Podcast, brought to you by ANZ Home Loans for financial well-beings.
And welcome back to another episode of the Real Estate Breakfast. Up to a Friday already. Where has the working week gone? Talking property news, that's what we do 7 days a week, is heard on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts and Amazon. Yeah, the 16th today of August, and we are heading back to Sydney. Margaret Lomas is joining us from Destiny Financial Solutions. And good morning, Margaret. Welcome back to the Real Estate Breakfast. I know that when we were talking a couple of weeks ago, we had just clicked into August. Here we are on the 16th. Boy, the year, where's it gone?
Well, here we are on my birthday weekend.
Oh, happy birthday.
Thank you. It's my birthday on the 20th, so very close. And in my family, we have a birthday week. We have a week of celebrations every time it's somebody's birthday.
Oh, well, so a very big week coming up.
Yes.
Last time that we were talking about these investment properties where people not necessarily give it enough sort of thought as to where they are buying. It's cheap, they're buying, they're adding to their portfolio. And in the case that we spoke about 2 weeks ago, there was that investor that pretty much exclusively was buying in smaller areas. Now, I just want to make a mention. A couple of weeks ago, we were talking about this area of Cloncurry. Now, I know that you have a real estate brain for all geographical real estate and properties right across Australia. No doubt you have heard of Cloncurry. The median house price there, $211,000. Couldn't believe it, and apparently buys you a pretty decent home.
Very attractive for both investors and for first home buyers. And I'd like to deal with them in two separate conversations, really, to talk about whether we think it's the right thing to do to be able to buy a pretty nice house for $250,000 in a place like Cloncurry. I know you've got some opinions on that.
Well, yeah, for $211,000, obviously the deposit on that is very small. It's the pluses and the minuses. You know, you're not going to get the movie theatre probably, Margaret, if you're moving to Cloncurry. There are certain things that you're going to have to sort of pass on. But if you want to get into the real estate market and you're really hurting with rentals, I was quite sort of surprised at the value that, you know, $211,000 gives you. On the face of it, I think most people would think you're getting a wreck of a home, and that's not the case. You're getting actually quite a nice 3-bedroom home to live in.
Yes, and definitely well under replacement value with construction costs as high as they are. But let's just talk about where we are in terms of Cloncurry. So we're 19 hours drive, or nearly 20 hours drive from Brisbane. We're an hour and 20 from Mount Isa. Being up around Cloncurry, you could holiday up in Cairns and Townsville because that's a lot closer than Brisbane. Population of around about 3,500 people. So if you are a first home buyer and you can get into a house of your own in Cloncurry at a great price, you probably only need a $20,000 to $25,000 deposit to be able to do that, then you can get into a house that's quite nice and into a small community that a lot of people are quite happy living in smaller communities like that. But we just have to look at what the downside is for you. First of all, if you move there from far away, you're a long way from family and you're a long way from being able to get to a place where you can get back to family. So you'd need to drive into Mount Isa to fly anywhere, and Mount Isa has limited places that it flies to. There are other things that you also would be foregoing as a resident of a town like Cloncurry, and that is a lot of the services that aren't provided until a town gets up around the 20,000 population mark. There are many things that you're going to compromise and go without. And if you have a family, you have to have a mind to when your kids are in their teens and what do teens normally do in these small towns, because there's usually nothing for them to do. I think if you're the kind of person who's maybe getting close to retirement or a very early first home buyer who wants to get on to the property ladder, not ready to start a family yet, it could be an option. But let's also also remember that as an investment, whether you're investing as your first home to get on the property ladder, or you're investing as an investor because you think, I can't really afford to become a property investor, but I can in Cloncurry because it's such a low buy-in price and I can afford that. We've got to look at the downsides, and that is that the first home buyer looking to be able to go up the property ladder by buying a property that grows in value and then they move into the next property could be disappointed when Cloncurry doesn't have those growth drivers to make that property grow, and therefore they don't ever get onto that next level of the property ladder because all they're doing is paying down a mortgage, and it's really very similar to just saving the money anyway. And for a property investor, property investors who invest because they think it's affordable to them often miss the very important things about investing, which is that the property, no matter how good the cash flow is and the rent return, it needs to grow at some time if it's going to do its job in providing an asset and a nest egg for you when you get closer to retirement. Cash flow is one thing, and it's great for a property to get enough rent to cover the costs while that mortgage is being paid down. But unless that property then also grows so that your net worth improves and grows, then it's not really performing its job in your portfolio and not helping you to achieve the goals of a more financially secure end date, whether that's retirement or whether that's a little bit later in your life.
Well, I know, Margaret, who probably wouldn't be moving into Cloncurry, and that is the Metro Millennials. Yeah. They probably would say no, and that's the next thing I want to talk about, because we mentioned this not that long ago, that over the past year, 24% of people have moved from cities into some of these regional areas, with the first quarter of this year seeing the fifth highest rate in 6 years. So the Metro Millennials, they're leading this trend, seeking affordable lifestyle changes, and they're going to the Gold Coast, Geelong, Sunshine Coast, etc., but probably not Cloncurry.
No, probably not. And I find this an interesting article. I read the same article about these millennials, Metro Millennials. It's a millennial. And the millennials, as we've said, will do anything, won't they? The article, the headline was that they're moving into these regional areas. And it sort of painted the picture in my head before I read into the article of all of these younger people moving out into these lovely, charming little country towns and reinvigorating those country towns and starting a new generation there. But in fact, when I read further, they're talking about Gold Coast, Newcastle, Geelong, and let's face it, none of those things are what we consider to be your traditional regional area. They're not small country towns. They offer a city lifestyle. Have you been to Geelong lately? I mean, Geelong has some wonderful restaurants and some wonderful lifestyle choices, and it's not that far to get back into Melbourne if you need to go. The Gold Coast has some great lifestyle options, some more affordable housing, still not affordable really, but more affordable housing. And if you need to go to Brisbane, it's not that far. The same goes for Newcastle. They've just developed that whole foreshore area there. They've got some fabulous lifestyle stuff going on in Newcastle. So it's not like our millennials have left the big city to go to the small country town. They're really going just from one city to another because they still get all of their lifestyle needs met in these wonderful areas, but they don't have to pay quite as much to live. They don't have to pay quite as much to buy a house or even to rent a house. So it makes sense to me that they're moving out to those areas. This is how life's always gone. Mm-hmm. When Sydney began, everybody lived in the city, and then the urban sprawl got to the point where now Penrith is a city and people live in Penrith City or Parramatta City. So it makes sense to me that these millennials are choosing this lifestyle, but still keeping one hand and one foot back in the city by, first of all, being near a big city, but also moving to what's really become a city anyway.
Yeah, and I think that probably gets recalibrated as prices keep going up, because they won't be able to afford necessarily the Gold Coast and the Geelongs. And then, dare I say it, they really do have to go into true regional Australian areas. Right, let's have a look at the insurance premium, something that I wanted to discuss with you, because we've talked about the overhyping of the insurance surges and costs as a result. Of course, we've got the floods, we've got the fires. It doesn't take much for an insurance company to say, oh, goody, we can increase those premiums. Let's put them up because we've got the floods and the fires. But the central argument that we've been talking about is around just how justifiable is the increased surge in premium prices versus the reality of where the rise in premiums should be at. And are we simply being ripped off? So that's the first question, Margaret. And then I want to come back and talk about portfolios and self-insuring. But to the argument about are we being ripped off, what do you think?
I think so, because what's happening is the misfortune of the smaller handful of insurance policy holders, which is those who live in the flood and fire prone area. It's being shared amongst all policy holders now. I know that in my own portfolio, I've been absolutely shocked and horrified at how much I'm paying for properties that previously it may have been around $1,000 a year to insure a property, and now I'm looking at over $3,000 for that same property. So it's a big increase over what it used to be only 5 years ago. And this is for properties that don't exist in a high risk area. So they don't exist on a floodplain. They don't exist where there's a lot of trees around, so chances of bushfires. These are just ordinary, everyday suburban properties, and many of them are just very small 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom properties that are now costing me an absolute fortune to insure. You feel like you can't be without insurance, so you're kind of held to ransom by the insurance companies. But I think there has to be a different way of assessing risk.
So let's discover the self-insuring, because when you say that, a lot of people will sort of go, what? What are you talking about, self-insuring? You've got a large portfolio. This is something that you've been thinking about, self-insuring right across that portfolio of properties.
And this isn't something that I recommend for everyone. And if you have a single property, this may not be the best way to go. But when I think about all of the properties that I have, and I think about the insurance premiums that I'm now paying, then I'm probably looking at around $60,000 to $80,000 a year in insurance premiums. Now, notwithstanding the fact that they are a tax deductible cost to me, so I get back some of that by way of a tax deduction, we have to think about whether or not it's worth it, and whether or not I'd be better taking that sum of money, placing it in offset against one of my mortgages so that I also am saving my interest on that, because for every $1 I have in offset, that's $1 of the mortgage that I don't pay interest on. So there's a savings to be made there. And keeping that as a fund to actually cover anything that goes wrong in my properties anyway. Now, to arrive at this decision, I went back over the last 5 years or so just to see how many insurance claims I'd actually made on my properties. And I think I only found 2, and they were for such a small sum of money that when I then add up all of the money that I've spent on these insurance premiums, I could have funded those repairs 10, 20, 100 times over by not paying the insurance premiums. Now, obviously, there's a downside and a risk. If you have a property that's in any kind of a potential flood zone, if there's any risk of heavy rain causing flooding to the property, if you're anywhere near the bush and there's a chance that your property may one day be engulfed by fire, then I'd never recommend self-insurance. You also have to understand the risks of self-insurance. So if I decide to self-insure my whole portfolio and one of my properties burns down, then that's then on me to rebuild that. So that's one of the risks that I would be taking. But I'm thinking about the fact that, at $80,000 a year, after 3 or 4 years, I've probably already got enough money in that fund to rebuild one of the houses anyway. And so it's definitely worthwhile doing the sums yourself, checking out all of the facts. You've really got to take on board all of the facts and just asking yourself whether it's worthwhile self-insuring your properties rather than, paying so much money across the board.
It's such a good point in terms of 3 years. That sinking fund would really be quickly built up to quite a sum of money. Here's a question. If you are a property investor and you've got a portfolio, a number of properties, would you consider that? We'd love to hear from you. Of course, our email address is myrealestatepodcast@gmail.com. Fantastic stuff there, Margaret. Great to chat with you on this Friday morning. Enjoy the upcoming weekend. Enjoy your long week of birthday celebrations. And thanks again for coming on to the Real Estate Breakfast.
It's been my pleasure.
We connect you to the best real estate information across Australia. The Real Estate Podcast.